Good morning. Good morning. Much better, thank you. Fortunately, we all made it through this bad weather unscathed, except the Mayfields had some damage out at their place. And we've got a couple of our members that are really tired from working for several days without sleep, the days they're volunteering. We've reached out, several of us have reached out, and everybody is taken care of. We don't have nobody has a need at this time. But if you know somebody that does have a need, if you would let us know, we're going to be happy to help. I don't know if some of you remember or not, but Andrew Bowen, they attended here 12, 15 years ago, something like that, a long time ago. He is now an elder at Elmore Church. No injuries, but their place was pretty well destroyed. So need to keep the Bowens in our prayers through all this also. Does anybody, and also all of our sick and everybody that's going on, the Moody's are still out. Several recovering from surgeries. Brother Ezekiel with his pacemaker that took them quite a while because there was a doctor had to take care of a leak that kept bleeding, so he's kind of sore and stiff, so keep him in mind. Anyone else? Jameson, how did his appointment work out?
I got the wires taken out of his jaw. He's doing good. He's got another appointment on the 20th to get his feeding tube replaced.
Okay. So his jaw is still wired and no, wire is out. Okay. Wire is out, but they've got to replace the G-tube, right? Okay. Anyone else? Brother Jim, lead us in a prayer, please.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day and for the blessings that we've enjoyed. We thank you for your protective hand during the storm. Heavenly Father, we ask also that you be with those that were mentioned as being sick. Be with us this morning as we study, and we pray that those things that we say and do will be pleasing in your sight. This prayer we pray in Christ's name. Amen.
Last week we discussed Gideon a little bit. We was in chapter 6 of Judges, and we discussed Midianites, what they had done to Israel and what was going on there. We got through about verse 25 or so in the chapter, and then we skipped to the end of the chapter so we could go with the test of the fleece, due on the fleece. So today we're going to talk about Gideon and the Midianites, and we're going to begin in chapter 7 of Judges. And I'm going to read just the first 3 or 4 words, not even going to make it through the first verse completely. It said, then Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, Jerubbaal, that is Gideon. How did Gideon come up with the name Zerubbabel or Jerubbaal, or however you want to pronounce that? If we look back in chapter 6, the part that we skipped last week, the story picks up around verse 25, a little bit before that, but Gideon is talking to the Lord, the angel of the Lord, and then in verse 24, Gideon built an altar to the Lord and called it the Lord is Peace. And then in verse 25, it said, now it came to pass the same night that the Lord said to him, take your father's young bull, the second bull of 7 years old, and tear down the altar of Baal that your father has, and cut down the wooden image that is beside it. So he had been instructed he had built an altar to the Lord, and then he had been instructed to destroy the altar to Baal. And then if you will go over to verse 29, when the people got up the next morning and saw all that, so they said one to another, "Who has done this thing?" And when they had inquired and asked, they said, "Gideon, the son of Joash, has done this thing." Up through this verse in chapter 6, the only name we know Gideon by is Gideon. And then, verse 30, then the men of the city said to Joash, "Bring out your son that he may die, because he has torn down the altar of Baal, and because he has cut down the wooden image that was beside it." 31 is crucial. But Joash said to all who stood against him, "Would you plead for Baal? Would you save him? Let the one who would plead for him be put to death by morning. If he is a god, let him plead for himself, because his altar has been torn down." Now, the first thing is that Joash had built the altar to Baal. They were Baal worshipers. God told Gideon to build him an altar, and Gideon worshiped God, the true God. Then when the men of the area challenged Joash to bring out his son and kill him because he had torn down their altar, his response was, "If Baal is a god, let him fight for himself." And then in verse 32, we get Gideon's second name. "Therefore on that day he called him Zerubbabel, saying, Let Baal plead against him, because he has torn down his altar." So basically the name Zerubbabel is the person against whom Baal would strike. So that's how come Gideon has two names, and they're sort of interchanged the rest of the way through the story. Questions, comments?
Does this remind you of another incident with the altar? And I think it was Isaiah. Well, he challenged the worshipers of I think Baal, and put to death all of them.
Yeah, they kept standing it up and he kept tearing it down. Okay. Now the rest of the verse is, and all the people who, verse 1 of chapter 7, and all the people who were with him rose early and encamped before the well of Harad, so that the camp of the Midianites was on the north side of them by the hill of Morah in the valley. Exactly who are the Midianites? We didn't discuss this last week, but who are they? If we go back to the book of Genesis, chapter 25, verse 1 and 2, Sarah has died and been buried. And what does Abraham do? He takes another wife. Abraham again took a wife, and her name was Keturah. And she bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. If you recall, back in those days, that when a child was born and they went someplace and built their own little area, then that location was named after them. So Midian and the Midianites come from that line. Now, to trace that down just a little bit, now if we'll go to Exodus chapter 2. And start reading in verse 15. When Pharaoh, this is right after Moses had killed the Egyptian, and when Pharaoh heard of this matter, he sought to kill Moses, but Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian. And he sat down by a well. And then if you will go down a few more verses to verse 21, then Moses was content to live with the man, and he gave Zipporah, his daughter, to Moses. So Moses had married a Midianite woman. Her father was a priest of Midian. Now, for territory-wise, if you look at me and I'm a map, and say right here in the center of my chest is the Dead Sea. To the east of the Dead Sea is Judah. To the west of the Dead Sea was Moab. Okay? You're going west. Yeah, you're going west. To the west of the Dead Sea is Moab. Slightly below Moab is what country? Edom. And who are the Edomites? They're from Esau. Slightly below that is the land of the Midianites. So that gives you just a little bit of where everybody is. Now let's go to Numbers chapter 22. Numbers 22, verses 4 through 7. So Moab said to the elders of Midian, now this company will lick up everything around us as an ox licks up the grass of the field. And Balak, the son of Zippor, was king of the Moabites at that time. Then he sent messengers to Balaam, the son of Beor, at Pethor, which is near the river in the land of the sons of this people, to call him, saying, look, a people has come from Egypt. See, they cover the face of the earth and are settling next to me. Therefore, please come at once. Curse this people for me, for they are too mighty for me. Perhaps I shall be able to defeat them and drive them out of the land, for I know that he whom you bless is blessed, and he whom you curse is cursed. So the elders of Moab and the elders of Midian departed with the diviner's fee in their hand, and they came to Balaam and spoke to him the words of Balak. So if we trace the history then, it goes all the way back to when they had crossed the Red Sea and was going to the Promised Land, that Moab and Midian at that time were ganging up on them and were against them, and them traveling and trying to destroy them at that point. Questions, comments? Verse 2, and the Lord said to Gideon, the people who are with you are too many. They're too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel claim glory for itself against me, saying, mine own hand has saved me. So the Lord wanted to make sure that he got the credit for what was going on. Verse 3, now therefore proclaim in the hearing of the people, saying, whoever is fearful and afraid, let him turn and depart at once from Mount Gilead. And 22,000 of the people returned, and 10,000 remained. So they'd started out with 32,000 people. And when they were told, if you don't want to be here, leave, 22,000 of them left. Now, how many Midianites were they going up against? We're going to have to skip a little bit and go to chapter 8. Chapter 8 and verse 10. Now Zebah and Zalmunna were at Karkor, and their armies with them, about 15,000, all who were left of all the army of the people of the east, for 120,000 men who drew the sword had fallen. So this is after the fight. Before the fight, there was 120,000 plus 15,000, so there was 135,000 Midianites at the beginning of this battle. And the Lord had said 32 is against 135,000. That's too many people to go up and fight. So their numbers was reduced to 10,000. Quick math says now that the odds are 13-1. But look what the Lord does in verse 4. The Lord said to Gideon, the people are still too many. 13-1 odds, and it's still too many. Bring them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. Then it will be that of whom I say to you, this one shall go with you, the same shall go with you, and of whomever I say to you, this one shall not go with you, the same shall not go. So he brought the people down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, everyone who laps from the water with his tongue, as a dog laps, you shall set apart by himself. Likewise, everyone who gets down on his knees to drink. And the number of those who lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, was 300 men, but all the rest of the people got down on their knees to drink. Who can decipher that? What does it mean if they lap like a dog? Getting down on their knees and going to the water. What did the other group do? They brought the water. What is the difference between getting water into your body that way?
See what's going on this way.
If you are down on your hands and knees facing the water, you are oblivious to anything else going on. Is a person that's supposed to be a soldier ever going to put themselves in a place of not knowing what's going on around them? We call it situational awareness. You've heard that term. So the wise ones drinking were the ones that were still observant but taking in the water. So out of starting with the 32,000, we're down to 300 that were observant enough that God said, I'll use these 300 to make my point. Now the odds are 135,000 against 300. Pardon? 450 to 1. That's pretty stout odds, isn't it?
But actually it's one against everything.
One all-powerful one against everybody. How many times do we use the phrase, if God is on our side, who can be against us? I've been put in a few situations, and I'm sure some of you others have too, where I had rather be doing things by myself than somebody trying to help me. People trying to help you, a lot of times, if they don't know what they're doing, what do? They get in your way and cause you more time and more aggravation. Verse 7, then the Lord said to Gideon, by the 300 men who lapped I will save you and deliver the Midianites into your hand. Let all the other people go, every man to his place or to his home. So God is going to use these 300 to take care of business. So the people took provisions and their trumpets in their hands, and he sent away all the rest of Israel, every man to his tent, and retained those 300 men. Now the camp of Midian was below him in the valley. Now we don't do this anymore. We don't have to. But up until modern wartime, until modern communication and other things, even up to and including the Civil War, or the war between the states that we had in the United States, the camp of the enemies was within eyesight of each other. They'd spend the night and they could see each other. Town people would a lot of times come out and perch on a hilltop and have a picnic lunch and watch a battle down in the valley where the clash was taking place. Like I say, with our modern communication and technology and all, we don't do those kind of things today. But if you put your mindset back in that time, because later on we're going to find out a little bit about some more about that. But even this massive army over here and this army over here, they could basically throw rocks and hit each other at times if they wanted to. That's how close they would be. Verse 9, it happened on the same night that the Lord said to him, arise, go down against the camp. I have delivered it into your hand. God's saying, now's the time. Take your people and go. Time to get this done. But if you are afraid to go down to the camp with Purah, your servant. If you do that, verse 11 tells him, you will hear what they say, and afterward your hand will be strengthened to go down against the camp. Then he went down with Purah, his servant, to the outpost of the armed men who were in the camp. Not only could see them, in the night they could get close enough to hear the enemy's conversation. Now the Midianites and Amalekites, all the people of the east, were lying in the valley as numerous as locusts, and their camels were without number in the sand by the seashore in multitude. And when Gideon had come, there was a man telling a dream to his companion, and he said, I have had a dream. To my surprise, a loaf of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian. It came to a tent and struck it so that it fell and overturned, and the tent collapsed. Then his companion answered and said, this is nothing else but the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel, into his hand. God has delivered Midian and the whole camp. Before we go on, let's back up. What significance is there about it being barley bread that tumbled down into the tent and destroyed it? Again, back in the day, barley bread was sort of a last resort to eat. It was not very good. So if you put that in comparison, what did the Midianites think of Israel? But then when this happens, they think that, okay, Gideon is coming after us, so now one of the least is going to come in and destroy. And verse 15 says, and so it was when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation that he worshiped, he returned to the camp of Israel and said, arise. And what did he say after that? Not that it's time for war, or now's the night we go to battle. He says, the Lord has delivered the camp of Midian into your hand. So, up to this point, do you think that Gideon might have been a little bit reticent about going down and taking on 135,000 trained warriors? And God knew Gideon, knew his attitude, knew what was going on, so he said, well, Go down and hear for yourself what they think. And then when he heard that even they thought that he was going to come and destroy them, that then give him the strength, I guess you could say the proof, that God wanted him to have so he could carry out the mission. And so it was when Gideon heard that, verse 16, then he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, and he put a trumpet in every man's hand, with empty pitchers and torches inside the pitchers. And he said to them, look at me and do likewise. Watch, and when I come to the edge of the camp, you shall do as I do. When I blow the trumpet, I and all who are with me, then you also blow the trumpets on every side of the whole camp and say, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. So Gideon and the 100 men who were with him came to the outpost of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch. I'm going to pause there for just a minute. What time is it if it's the middle watch? Pardon? Probably a little before midnight. Now, the way that they did that was during the Old Testament times, the Jews had it divided into 3 watches in the night, divided into 4 hours of watch. Then when they were basically absorbed into Rome, the Roman Empire, the Romans went by 4 watches, so they then started doing a 4-watch night. But during this particular time, it was 3 watches of 4 hours each, and it would be 6 to 10, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then 11, 12, 1, 2. So, and then it's going to happen at the beginning of that watch, so it's probably sometime between 10 p.m. and midnight is when it was going to take place. What is significant about it being at night? Well, it's not only time to sleep, but if you are a strategist, when do you like to do things? When you can do things, take them by surprise. When do most of the, today, if you hear about a SWAT team or a raid going on at somebody's house, when does it happen? At night. So you can take them by surprise. Just as they had posted the watch, so I'm starting at the middle watch is 10 to 2, and they just posted the watch, so that's probably putting us around the 10 o'clock hour. And they blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers that were in their hands. Now, even though it's the beginning and 10 o'clock, I'm going to be real nosy. How many of you in here go to bed before 10 o'clock? Don't be bashful. 1, 2, 3, 4. Andrew and I usually don't make it to bed till sometime after 11, close to midnight. Now, when our power is out, all that goes away. We don't sit up by torchlight at night. We just go ahead and go to bed. So, and when I was growing up in the country, we normally went to bed early because we was getting up at daylight. Here, the Army, no need for them, so they are, by the beginning of the second watch, they're already gone out except for those that are on watch. Verse 20, then the 3 companies blew the trumpets, broke the pitchers, they held the torches in their left hands and the trumpets in their right are blowing, and they cried, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. Now, before we give it away by reading the next verse, what do you think? Put yourself, mindset, as a Midianite soldier, either sleeping on the ground or in a tent or whatever, and you are startled awake, and all around the camp you hear people shouting, trumpets blowing, and see 300 torches. Well, number one, pardon?
It would really scare you.
It would be a scary sight, wouldn't it? Because normally, did everybody in the army carry a torch? No. So, and did everybody carry a trumpet? No. So you see all this, and then you've got to imagine that there's going to be not only those, but a whole bunch more out there. And in the nighttime,
And you're surrounded.
you're surrounded, and in the nighttime with low light, how easy is it to get confused? Especially if you're just coming out of a sleep. And it said every man stood in his place all around the camp, and the whole army ran and cried out and fled. Which direction are you going to flee? You're surrounded. You're going, and what happens when you pass one of your fellow soldiers? He's an enemy now, isn't he? You can't tell who's who. So there was mass chaos and confusion going on as they ran around in circles. When the 300 blew the trumpets, the Lord set every man's sword against his companion throughout the whole camp. So they wound up killing each other. And the army fled to Beth Acacia toward Zerah as far as the border of Abel Maholah by Tabbath. And the men of Israel gathered together from Naphtali, Asher, and Manasseh and pursued the Midianites. Then Gideon sent messengers throughout all the mountains of Ephraim, saying, "Come down against the Midianites and seize from them the watering places as far as Beth-barah and the Jordan." Then all the men of Ephraim gathered together and seized the watering places as far as Beth-barah and the Jordan. So after the initial fight, and they wound up killing 120,000, only 15,000 left. Now Gideon sends out the message, come on down and do some cleanup work.
But they didn't
Get to the watering holes, pardon?
But they really didn't kill the 120,000. 120 killed themselves.
Yeah, they killed themselves. I think it would be kind of it doesn't happen that much anymore, but I think if you would go back through history and could really read and digest some of the stuff, how many people get killed by what they call friendly fire? Not being able to distinguish one from another.
That's a misnomer.
If you're firing at me, you're not my friend, right?
It's not friendly.
Anyway, these two, and with all this going on, they captured two princes of the Midianites, Oreb and Zeb. They killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and Zeb they killed at the winepress of Zeb. Now, just for clarification, when they would kill somebody at a location, they would generally name that location after them. This is not like they lived in that location and this rock was already named Oreb, and that wine press was owned by Zeb. That's just where they had pursued them and killed them. And they pursued Midian and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon on the other side of the Jordan. This was another famous or infamous thing through history, that when people would kill people that way, as proof, they'd bring them a head to show that it was done. You can go through several places and find that out. Questions, comments?
That was David and Goliath.
Yep, for one. In the New Testament, who asked for a head? So, anything else? Chapter 7.
What amazes me is even after this, the people fall away.
That's where we're going in chapter 8. Yes, sir. We've got time to get into chapter 8 just a little bit. I think we got about 10 minutes to go. If we pick up in or in chapter 8, the men of Ephraim said to him, "Why have you done this by not calling us when you went to fight with the Midianites?" And they reprimanded him sharply. Historically, the 12 tribes, they wanted to be in the fight and take care of things. But Gideon explains to him what happened here later, and everything is okay. This was the Lord's fight anyway, wasn't it? But verse 6 says, "And the leaders of Succoth said, let me back up just a little bit. So verse 4, "When Gideon came to the Jordan, he and the 300 men who were with him crossed over, exhausted but still in pursuit." How many had Gideon started with? 300. He still has 300. How many had the Midianites started with? 135,000. How many did they have left? 15,000. Then he said to the men of Succoth, "Please give loaves of bread to the people who follow me, for they are exhausted, and I am pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, kings of Midian." And the leaders of Succoth said, "Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in your hand, that we should give bread to your army?" Well, no, they don't have them. They're chasing them. So in essence, what they're doing is they're afraid, and they're not going to help them. They're not going to feed them because they feel like if they get involved at this point, that the others are going to come back and take care of them. Verse 8 says, "So then he went from there to Penuel and spoke to them in the same way, and the men of Penuel answered him as the men of Succoth had answered." So they're not getting any help along the way here. Now verse 10 says, "Now Zebah and Zalmunna were at Karkor, and their armies with them." We just read this earlier. 15,000 who were left. Now if we'll skip, they do all this fighting and taking care of things. And verse 27 says, "Then Gideon made it into," well, let me back up a little more. Let's go all the way down to verse 21. "So Zebah and Zalmunna said, 'Rise yourself and kill us, for as a man is, so is his strength.' So Gideon arose and killed Zebah and Zalmunna and took the crescent ornaments that were on their necks." So Gideon had started to tell somebody else to kill them, but they said, "Do it yourself," and he did. He dispatched of them. He took care of business. And then with the gold that he took from their necks, he made an ephod. Now when we get down to verse 29, we start talking about the end of Gideon, his death, and this is going to get into what Brother Day had mentioned. Verse 29, "Then Zerubbabel, the son of Joash, went and dwelt in his own house. Gideon had 70 sons who were his own offspring, for he had many wives. And his concubine, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son, whose name he called Abimelech. Now, the reason we point this one out is, in essence, did he have 70 or 71 sons? He had 71. Abimelech is by a concubine. Why are they not listed as in his offspring with many wives? Because
Not official?
a concubine is considered a second wife and therefore not in the line of inheritance of anything. So the 70 were the ones that were supposed to be in line for everything. Now Gideon, the son of Joash, died at a good old age and was buried in the tomb of Joash's father in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. So it was, as soon as Gideon was dead, that the children of Israel again played the harlot with the Baals and made Baal-berith their god. Thus the children of Israel did not remember the Lord and their God, who had delivered them from the hands of all their enemies on every side, nor did they show kindness to the house of Gideon in accordance with the good he had done for Israel. How many times does this make just in the judges that they have gone the wrong way and had to be saved? Who was the first judge? Remember the song? Othniel? Well, that didn't take because it wasn't long before they strayed again. And who came in after that? Number 2. Starts with an Ehud. Who was next? Shamgar. Who was next? Deborah. Then Gideon. So that's 6 times, and now they're off the cliff again. No. Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah. That's 5 times, and they're off the cliff again. So, but the reason I had mentioned this about his offsprings earlier is we've got just a couple of more minutes that we're going to get into chapter 9 just real quick. Then Abimelech, the son of Gideon, went to Shechem to his mother's brothers and spoke with them. Of course, they didn't consider him a brother. So what it winds up to be in verse 5, then he went to his father's house at Ophrah and killed his brothers, the 70 sons of Gideon, on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Gideon, was left because he had hid himself. And all the men of Shechem gathered together, all of Beth Millo, and they went and made Abimelech king beside the terebinth tree at the pillar that was in Shechem. So the one that was supposed to not have an inheritance killed 69 others that was in line of succession, and then was made the king. There's a story that's going to come after that with Jotham and Abimelech, but that's for another time and another place. So, any questions, comments, anything about Gideon and his battle, his calling, his battle with the Midianites?
Verse 5 says, on one stone.
Killed them all on one stone.
Killed them all at the same location. Anything else?
We look at it and you say, these towns were bloody, but we see the same thing today.
Oh, yeah.
But we don't see it written as it is in the Bible.
No, we don't. And we sort of live, shall I say, a more sanitized lifestyle than we used to live. Brother Cox will know this very well. He and I grew up similar backgrounds. Today you ask somebody where you get your eggs and what they're going to say. Grocery store. Where are you going to get your bacon? Grocery store. They don't see the other end of it, but I'll leave it at that. So thank y'all so much for your comments.